We are saying you can put these in foods for kids. The phrase we're going to use is generally recognized as safe. Kids are dying. Their mortgages are paid by demonizing what I am talking about. The biggest mistake we're making is we're eating ultra-processed food. We lose and then rebirth like 600 billion cells per day.
On this week's episode of my podcast, I sat down with the one and only Calley Means. She has an incredible story that we talk about a little bit in this podcast. She went on after medical school at Stanford to a residency at Stanford in ear, nose, and throat surgery, and actually ended up leaving that residency in her 5th and final year because she became so disillusioned with the medical system and its failure to treat the root cause of the things that are making us sick. This is a really fascinating conversation with Calley. She's recently been on a lot of really awesome podcasts, for Carlson, Joe Rogan's podcast, and we got a little more technical than she usually does in this one. We talked about metabolic health, metabolic dysfunction, what causes metabolic dysfunction, and how to correct it. Both Calley and I strongly believe that at the root of so many of the chronic issues that we suffer from today as Westerners is metabolic dysfunction. So if metabolic dysfunction, also known as insulin resistance, is causing us to be sick, what's causing that? And how do we reverse it? This is an incredibly information-packed conversation with Calley. If you want to learn more about her views and this central nature of metabolic health, you can check out her new book, which is called Good Energy. It's been, I think, a New York Times #1 bestseller for the last 20 weeks, which is incredible. And yes, I know I've been away from podcasting for a little while. I've been working on a documentary on food quality and metabolic health myself. I've been working on content and trying to get into some surfing on the side. So enjoy this podcast with Calley Means. I know that you're going to learn a lot from this one, guys. Dr. Calley Means, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
So good to be here, Paul.
I just wanted to say from the outset that I am super impressed and wanted to thank you for all the work that you're doing in the world, because what I've seen recently has just really been sort of this wellspring of like good things coming from what you and Calley are doing. And I think it's really affecting the world in a positive way. So thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, right back at you. You've been on beating this drum for years.
Trying.
Yes.
Trying. So for people who are not familiar with your story, I mean, recently you've been on Rogan, you've been on Tucker Carlson's podcast, you've been really getting the message out there. But for someone who's not familiar with your story, can you share a little bit of your story with the audience, and we'll go from there, because there's an incredible story here and an awesome set of jumping off points.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think in many ways, there's some parallels to your own story. Like I trained as a medical doctor, conventional system, went to Stanford Medical School. And, you know, starting early in medical school, even before I went to surgical residency I trained in ear, nose, and throat, head and neck surgery. I started seeing like cracks in the facade. The first thing for me actually that really kind of made me scratch my head was the fact that we were learning all about cardiovascular health, and all the pharmacology and physiology of, heart disease, which is the #1 killer in the United States, in a windowless, dark, subterranean room where we sat for 8 hours a day. And then the only time we left that dark, subterranean room was to go to the cafeteria that was filled with total junk food. And I thought, this doesn't quite seem right. And I would go home and cook all my food and have a standing desk in my apartment at medical school. And then I would come to medical school and it was like this totally unhealthy environment. And this was in a new building at Stanford called the Li Ka-shing Center that was like the most expensive building ever built at Stanford, and was donated by this very wealthy Hong Kong philanthropist. And yet it was literally the building itself that the future doctors of America were being trained in was promoting the most unhealthy, cardiovascularly devastating lifestyle you could possibly imagine. So flash forward, I actually did a huge petition and research study on bringing standing desks into the classrooms. I write about this in my book, and the administration completely shot me down and said, this is ridiculous. And I actually did a 2-year IRB approved funded research project on whether medical students would benefit from standing desks in classrooms. And it was unequivocally yes, and they still shot it down. Long story short, went to residency. Now I'm in this surgical world. I think I'm such a badass because I'm a surgeon and I am like 4.5 years into my training, about to launch as a faculty surgeon. I was thinking about taking a job at Kaiser, and there was something about leaving residency where you're still kind of sheltered and being a full-fledged independent billing surgeon where I was starting to feel a ton of friction. Like, wait, like, I don't know if I can do this. Because what I was realizing is that like my salary for the rest of my life was going to be based on how many surgeries I could actually do. And that there was zero incentive for me as a doctor or a surgeon to actually make patients healthy. And when I started going down that road, I realized, wait, I've actually not been taught that there's a difference between doing surgery and a healthy patient, but those are different things. One is there to really truly create a healthy patient, you're changing the physiology in their cells. And there's no surgery that can change the physiology inside your cells. So this started opening up a Pandora's box that has now led to a 7-year journey that has, of course, changed every aspect of my life, to understanding that what is actually happening in the American body today is very consistent across the population and across the ages. There is a set of core physiologic disturbances caused by our modern diet and environment that are destroying our foundational metabolic health, the way we make energy in our cells. And this is showing up in our 200 different cell types as all these different diseases were actually fundamentally the same thing. It's what I call the trifecta of metabolic dysfunction or bad energy, oxidative stress, chronic inflammation, mitochondrial dysfunction, these invisible processes that we don't learn about, we don't really have good tests for, that are happening, that all the research, if you look from a root cause lens, shows that this is happening in, this is happening in prostate cancer, this is happening in depression, this is happening in Alzheimer's, it's happening in ADHD, this is happening in autism, it's happening in infertility, it's happening in endothelial dysfunction, it's happening all over the body. We're not talking about it, we're not treating it, we're not changing the environmental factors, we're paid to ignore it, and I had to change my life. So I quit my surgical residency, and I devoted my life to spreading the word and continuing to learn about the root cause of why Americans are sick. And because America is so powerful and so influential, the reasons why Americans are getting sick is also becoming the reasons why the entire world is getting sick. Then, really red pilling, it was like, I realized that, actually all the reasons we're sick, they're environmental. It's food, it's our diet, it's our lifestyle, it's we're sitting too much, we're not seeing sunlight, we're exposed to all these unregulated toxins, our emotional health is poor, the technology is destroying our dopamine systems, all this stuff. And then realizing actually a lot of the reasons we're sick are also the reasons why our earth is sick, the reasons why our soil is sick, the reasons why we're sort of destroying our oceans and it's all unsustainable. It's all connected. No one's talking about it. So of course, as I went down that journey, I learned about people like yourself, and there are many other people actually talking about this in healthcare and outside of healthcare. And I just don't think there's anything more important that we could be discussing or thinking about today than the increasingly poor human health on planet Earth caused by our environment that's destroying our core foundational processes of how we make energy and how that's interrelated to the destruction of the planet that is the most existential issue of our time. So that's kind of my journey.
I love it. And you have talked about this so eloquently in your book, which is called Good Energy. And I love this idea that you are really helping to distill for people that so many of these diseases that we suffer from are metabolic dysfunction at the core.
Yeah.
Something that I was not taught in medical school. How many nutrition classes did you have at Stanford Medical School? 0.
Yeah, no, we had a lecture, which was by Dr. Christopher Gardner, who you may know.
Yes, I'm familiar with him.
He's a big plant-based advocate.
Yes, he is.
But a dedicated researcher. And we had basically like a little seminar on like a Wednesday where he talked to us about a paper about how garlic extract was not shown to impact heart disease outcomes. And that was the nutrition research that I got in medical school. That is the nutrition education I got at Stanford Medical School. It was a lecture about garlic and heart disease.
And there's a whole center for nutrition studies at Stanford, right? Which is kind of funded by Beyond Meat or something. This was at the center of this twin documentary recently on Netflix, right?
Yeah, I don't know too much about that. Actually, I'd be interested to learn more about that. I know there was a documentary, but I didn't realize it was that Stanford's being funded by Beyond Meat.
I'm pretty sure we can fact check this for the podcast, but I'm pretty sure, and this is a separate thing I've talked about in the past. We don't have to go too far down this rabbit hole, but there was this recent Netflix documentary about this twin studies, right? And they brought in twins and they fed them. One of them was a omnivorous diet and one of them was a plant-based diet. Yeah. And they happened to give the plant-based diet people less calories, so they lost less weight. Surprising. Yeah. Anyway, the whole thing was a little bit misleading, I thought, but I'm pretty sure, I know Christopher Gardner is a plant-based person and we'll talk more about that later in the podcast. I have no issue with that other than the fact that should probably be disclosed in a movie that is about meat versus not meat. And if the premise of the movie is that maybe not eating meat is healthier, that should probably be part of it. And I'm pretty sure that center at Stanford has a lot of funding from like Beyond Meat or some of these other things. So anyway, that's interesting. I want to highlight a few things that you said there. Your head and neck surgeon residency is 5 years.
5 years.
And you left after 4.5 years.
4 and a few months.
So you were basically in the home stretch.
Oh yeah. I was right in the home stretch. I was about to sign a job offer. And I I just was starting to ask questions. And then as I brought up some of those concerns, like, why aren't we talking about nutrition? Why are we ignoring all these papers that talk about the impact? Well, they're not in the guidelines. They're not in the guidelines. We got to follow the guidelines. And then realizing anything you ask about where you can find all this medical research on the impact of diet on chronic inflammation and, the impact of mitochondrial dysfunction on chronic sinusitis and all these things. But the blanket statement that anyone will say if you try and say, like, why don't we practice this way, is it's poor quality research. It's poor quality research. You know it, but no, you know what I'm saying. Like, it's not the double-blind, placebo-controlled, peer-reviewed, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, and so, but then when you step back further, you're like, okay, well, first of all, there's very little incentive for people to do research on environmental factors. There's no one to fund it, right? It's not, and the nature of our highest tier of evidence, which is a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trial, those almost by definition lead us to a pharmaceutical intervention. Because how can you have a placebo and a, intervention if it's not something that's just a pill that you don't know what's in it? You can't really randomize exercise because you know exactly what you're doing. Or, you can't, but it's, so I kind of just started going down this rabbit hole of, okay, there's all this research that I'm not being taught about, it's not being surfaced. I have to dig for it on my own. Then I bring it up and bring it to, my superiors and say, like, why aren't we talking about this? Like an anti-inflammatory diet for an inflammatory condition that we're treating with steroids and surgery. And it's like, oh, well, that's not part of the guidelines and it's poor quality research. And it's like, well, it's poor quality research because of these systemic factors. So, like, what do we do here? Do we blindly follow the science and the guidelines, which is not leading to healthier Americans? Or do we break out of the sort of militaristic, regimented, frankly, cult that we're a part of and put pieces together, put dots together? But that's actually not what we're incentivized to do. That's dangerous, because if you start looking at the research and as an individual have the hubris to think, I might be able to put dots together and do things differently, one, you're not part of the pack, right? You're not part of the tribe. Two, you open yourself up to like litigation.
Yes.
Because if you do things differently, that's risky. And three, you're ridiculed. Like, because you're basically the nutrition wacko who, thinks you're too good for all of this and you're questioning the dogma. So there are so many cultural forces in medicine that are like, stay in your lane, practice the guidelines. Oh, also, we're not going to pay you for outcomes. We're going to pay you for volume. So do it as quickly as possible. And your promotion is also partially dependent on how much you bill. So, so all of this, I'm just like, what? I started getting a little radicalized. And that's why I had the sort of the gusto to quit. Because I thought, as I went down this path, I realized I'm like trapped in a multidimensional web of which trillions of dollars are incentivized to have me be myopically focused on a single way of seeing the body and practicing. And while I'm trapped in that web, Americans are getting sicker every single year. It's not working.
I've heard you talk about some statistics regarding pharma funding for medical education in general, or is this for residencies? Like, what is this? How much of what we learned in medical school, I guess a lot of it is from pharma-funded research, but does pharma actually fund things at Stanford or parts of residencies?
Yeah, well, it's actually hard to find the exact information, but Rob Lustig, professor emeritus of neuroendocrinology at UCSF, he believes that based on his research, 80% of medical school is underwritten by pharmaceutical companies. I can't say I have, it's hard. This is like kind of putting pieces together yourself. But when I was at Stanford, they received a $3 million grant from Pfizer for educational reform, for curriculum development. And they're
funded by Pfizer.
Funded by Pfizer, $3 million. And this is when I was there, I believe it was 2011. If you look up the articles from that time when we took the grant, when Stanford took the grant, also the dean at the time was Phil Pizzo, who's a pain specialist. And of course, Pfizer makes opioids. And he was actually the head of an NIH panel to reform the opioid guidelines at the time. So it's just like, oh my God, this is crazy. So $3 million grant. And if you look at the papers from that, or the articles written about this at the time, they all are so quick to say, but it was a no strings attached grant. They very clear, there are no expectations that Pfizer will have any influence on the curriculum. But what people don't really get, I mean, I think when you're more in the industry, you realize like everything's kind of about like who's your friend, who's your foe. If you're in yeah, maybe Pfizer's not saying you need to put this in the curriculum, but there's this friendly favorability, when you're kind of starting to get interlinked. I remember this from residency. We used to have these device developers take us out to dinner all the time. And I don't know if you had this in your residency, but like there was this nasal stent company that had basically after you did sinus surgery, you could stick this stent up in the opened sinuses that would release steroids. And they loved us and they would take us out to Fogo de Chao like all the time. And we had the best time ever. We would like, as residents, it's like, you know how it is. You're like looking for some way to burn off steam. So we'd have wine and we'd have steak and we'd hear about the new research on this nasal stent. Well, when you're in the operating room, when you're in the operating room and you're the resident, and also probably in the operating room with you is the friend from that company, the rep, who's like was at dinner with you and now they're in the operating with you. And they're like, this is exactly the time when we would like throw in a stent. And you're like, oh, let's do it. Like, I totally forgot. Yeah, let's do it. So all of a sudden it's not nefarious. It's not a bad, necessarily like bad vibes. It's just like you form relationships. And I think when that starts being bigger and bigger and bigger money, then it really starts to change the way we practice. But it's insidious. It's insidious and it's relationship based. And I don't necessarily think it's like an evil puppet master thing. I think it's like these are publicly traded companies that have quarterly earnings they need to meet. And we're trying to become sort of friends with everyone and the medical schools and the deans and the residents so that we can kind of all move towards the outcome we want, which is more Pfizer drugs prescribed, more nasal stents prescribed, et cetera, et cetera. So, but that's just to paint a picture. I've never shared that exact anecdote ever before, but like of how it can kind of like get its little claws in you. And all of a sudden you're putting nasal stents in all your sinus patients.
We're human.
Yeah.
And of course you kind of want to support your friend if you believe this is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And this is a
And
good
if the
thing.
data's good.
It's supported by the data. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Like, the word you used that I think is so accurate is it's just insidious.
Yeah.
And I think pharma knows what they're doing.
Right.
There's no question these companies know. They're smart.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a PA in cardiology before I went back to medical school and residency. When I was a PA in cardiology, this happened all the time, right? There were dinners from Pfizer. I actually kind of drank the Kool-Aid. I spoke for Lipitor. So I did talks.
Stop.
No, I did. I was a PA and I was like, this is good money on the side, right? And I'm doing the right thing and I'm a respected PA. Like I can look at the slides that Pfizer gives me and tell other mid-levels, nurse practitioners, PAs, some doctors about the data on Lipitor, about atorvastatin, 15 years ago or 12 or 14 years ago when I was working as a PA in cardiology. I thought I was doing a cool thing.
Yeah.
Like I'm now the PA doing a talk at one of these pharmaceutical dinners and here I am, now I'm the puppet, right? Yeah. And Pfizer's pulling my strings doing the Lipitor stuff. And that happened all the time. They would take us to dinner. There were other reps that would come in that became friends with me. Hey, why don't you give this person some more supplemental oxygen or something? So it all happens that way.
Yeah, it does. Oh my God. It's making me like, a couple of our residents, we flew to Vegas for free one weekend, post call, paid for by a company. And I forget it was something with lasers, but it was like a laser something for some type of surgery. We were put up at the Four Seasons and we just like had the best weekend of our lives. And then they are so intentional. The rep will always be in the operating with you. After they've invested in you, the rep will be there. And it's like, they're like, let's grab, and it's like, it's so insidious. They also would get, because we were ear, nose, and throat, which has facial plastics as part of it, we would be sent tens of thousands of dollars of Botox and fillers from the company that makes them. I think it's Allergan. And the residents, I don't even know if they were sending it to the attendings. They were sending it to the residents because they want the residents to kind of get hooked on their brand early. Then the residents would actually set up workshops where we got all this free product. We'd offer for all the nurses to come and basically let us like practice. And that then of course forged these wonderful relationships with like the nursing staff and like we're the residents who are like giving everyone free Botox. And it's just like, then all of a sudden you're a person who has this wonderful set of experiences around this product. Oh, it helped me forge relationships with other people in the hospital. And my face looks great because we were putting Botox in each other. And it's like, we're saving so much money by getting all these free samples. And then all of a sudden, all that, it's like, fine, except for the fact that you're in this swirl and this orbit, and it's all preventing you from looking up and looking around and realizing, oh my God, almost every single condition I'm treating in my specialty is an inflammatory condition. And the only tools I'm using are drugs and surgery. And yet, drugs and surgery can't do anything to change the physiology that's leading to inflammation in the first place. And what I'm doing is not doing anything to affect the root causes. So it's just, I'm trying to paint the picture of like, there is a swirl that you're caught up in that has industry's fingers all over it. And you're working your ass off 80 hours a week or more.
Yeah.
And then there is literally no incentive, nothing, no training, no time, no education, no incentive to look up and look around and be like, Rome is burning. Rome is burning. This patient has come back 4 times for the same issue. We're not getting to the root cause. Where there's nothing pushing you to do that. You have to basically rip the matrix cord to do that. And that's scary. And there's a lot tied up in you not doing that. So it's a wild world. And until I got fully out of it, I saw it clearly only when I could see it as an observer.
It was the same way when I was in cardiology. The cardiologist would literally mime to me, think here, a box around the heart. This is what you think about. Think here. And granted, I'm a PA at the time. I'm not an MD, right? I went back to medical school and then I did my residency in psychiatry at the University of Washington. And it was the exact same thing in psychiatry. I would say to the attendings, what is causing anxiety? We don't know. What about neuroinflammation? And their eyes would just go blank.
Mm-hmm.
And then you, like, even in residency, and this was probably the beginning of the end for me, I could do like a little PubMed search.
5 minutes.
You know, mitochondrial dysfunction.
Yes.
Right? Mitochondrial dysfunction and schizophrenia. Mitochondrial dysfunction.
100 papers.
Depression. A ton.
Yeah.
Neuroinflammation, switching of the mitochondria or the switching of the phenotypes of the microglial cells in the brain, the brain-derived macrophages. We have inflammation in the brain in depression. We have inflammation in the brain in schizophrenia. Where's that coming from?
Right.
They just, not a single attending in my residency could answer the question or challenge me to even think about the question. But I was just curious. And I remember I gave a talk the last year of my residency, and I stood in front of a room. It was a grand rounds at Harborview, which is one of the main hospitals in Seattle and where we got some of the sickest patients because it's like downtown Seattle. We would see florid psychosis, massive drug withdrawals, and people would come in with incredible suicidality and just really, really intense neuroinflammation. And I asked a room full of attendings, residents, and medical students, what is inflammation? And like really no one could answer me. And I mean, not that I'm so preeminently intelligent. I was just thinking a little bit differently than them and had done some research and tried to wrestle with this myself. So this is not surgery. This is surgery, cardiology, rheumatology. It's every specialty in medicine.
Specialty.
Which is why I love what you're saying here.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this, because if everything is metabolic dysfunction, I really want to just drill down on this to give listeners as much value as possible. How do we correct it? What is causing metabolic dysfunction? And I think that the crazy thing here is we know. So if everything is metabolic dysfunction, and by everything I'm sort of saying that, that's a little bit of hyperbole.
Right, because there are certain single nucleotide polymorphisms that create sickle cell anemia, and that's not caused by the environment.
There are genetic things.
Huntington's disease.
There are toxins in the environment. If the vast majority of the chronic diseases that most of us suffer from that affect our quality of life, our children's quality of lives, our parents' quality of lives, if this is mostly metabolic dysfunction, what causes it and how do we reverse it?
Oh my gosh. So as I did this research that you have done as well, and really looked okay, if it's the mitochondrial dysfunction, it's an energy problem that we have in our bodies. Essentially, all the diseases that we're dealing with. This is a key point for people to understand. We have 200 plus cell types in our body. We have retinal cells, endothelial cells, hepatocytes, renal cell, all these different cells. They all need energy to function properly. They all need gas in the car to do the work they need to do to be a functioning cell. And so any different cell type, a retinal cell, an endothelial cell, an ovarian theca cell. If it's underpowered, because it's a different type of cell, it's going to look like a different symptom. In the ovary, an underpowered cell that can't do its work properly may look like polycystic ovarian syndrome,
Right.
leading cause of female infertility. If an endothelial blood vessel cell in the penis isn't making energy properly, can't dilate and constrict properly, that could look like erectile dysfunction. If it's happening in an astrocyte or a glial cell or a prefrontal cortex neuron, it could look like migraines, Alzheimer's dementia, depression, anxiety, chronic pain. If it's happening in a heart myocyte, it could look like heart failure. And this is what the data is showing us. It is showing up in these different places like different things, because fundamentally, the distress of a different cell type is going to look like different symptoms, but that doesn't mean it's a different disease. This is the key thesis. So right now, evidence is showing us that about 93.2% of American adults have metabolic dysfunction, have this underpowering fundamental issue, and that what's causing that is usually some confluence of what I mentioned before, the mitochondria that actually make the energy being damaged. This machine that makes the power, makes the gas, has a problem functioning. That can be to a lot of different things. That underpowering and distress leads the immune system to get revved up, because what could be more inflammatory to a body than cells that can't do their work? They're sending out distress signals, and then the immune system tries to help, but the immune system can't help because the problem is caused by the environment. They can't take the donut out of your hand. And so you get this stew of chronic inflammation trying to help these distressed, underpowered cells, but they're impotent in the face of the threats. And then you have this other thing, oxidative stress, that's basically the damaged mitochondria that can't do their work properly, send out exhaust and sort of, create damaging byproducts that cause essentially like a chain reaction of destruction in the cells that leads to a lot of problems. So this is what's happening. So go to the research, you look up what in our environment do we pretty much know for certain is causing these three factors: oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, chronic inflammation, that ultimately bubbles up to metabolic dysfunction. There's about 9 things.
Okay.
And this is what I was led to. So it's our diet.
Okay.
It's our lack of sleep. It's our incredibly sedentary behavior. It's chronic stress, so psychological stress and poor emotional health. It is environmental toxins. It is our modern relationship with light, so circadian disruption based on our new relationship with sunlight and artificial light. It's issues with how we relate to temperature. So the fact that we live a thermoneutral existence now, we're all at 72 degrees and we don't have thermal stimuli to promote metabolic health. And certainly microbiome issues, which is kind of tied to food, but also separate from food, because there's a lot of other things destroying our microbiome. And lastly, it's the medications we're taking. It's the total and utter overuse of over-the-counter and prescription medications, many of which directly cause mitochondrial dysfunction, oxidative stress. So it's like those are, when I kind of went through tens of thousands of papers to understand this question, it's like those are the buckets. And what's interesting when we look at food, sleep, stress, movement, toxins, light, temperature, microbiome, and medications, if we look at all the way we're interacting with those different aspects of our life, the world that we're in today is 180 degrees different than how it was through all of human history. Like the pace of change and technological innovation over the past 100 years, 200 years, we're talking about like light bulb forward. We're talking about invention of plastics and pesticides forward. We're talking about thermostats forward. This is like 100, 200 max years old that we had these things that changed everything about processed foods, 40 years, 50 years old, brand new. Computers that turned us into sedentary knowledge workers. These things are brand new. They're all kind of changing the way our cells exist in the world. And what we have basically seen over the past 50 years with the just exponential rise in all chronic diseases is that the world we're living in and choosing to live in today is not conducive to functional human cellular biology, full stop. That is why our life expectancy is actually going down in the richest country in the world. We can't even keep life expectancy stable. This is why almost 50% of kids have a chronic lifestyle illness. This is why 93.2% of adults, it's not working. And we're kind of like, we're obviously sitting here, we're living in this world, we're doing okay. A lot of people kind of look like they're kind of doing okay. But the reality is that 75% of people over the age of 55 have at least one chronic illness. We're kind of right now, like if you squint, a lot of people kind of look like they're doing okay. But I think what we're here to share in the world is that like we're things aren't getting better, things are getting worse. And if we don't, a lot of these threats are invisible and they also culturally are normal. And if we don't actually stop before things are kind of get worse, like we could be reaching an issue of like existential health collapse in our country. Infertility is going up 1% per year. And like right now we kind of have IVF to kind of like smooth the edges, make it seem like we're doing okay. But like what's the end game there? So that's kind of the point is that the world is not what it once was. A lot of the things we've invented under the sake of innovation and comfort are actually destroying our cellular biology. And we're in this funny moment right now where we kind of know the writing's on the wall, but we're also kind of doing okay enough that there's not enough urgency. And I think I don't want to be alarmist, but I think now is the moment for us to actually wake up and change our ways, change the way we're living, and get comfortable with discomfort. Because ultimately, we got across those 9 factors I mentioned, we got to make some distinct changes like standing up, getting outside, eating real food, avoiding the toxins, supporting our microbiome, stop taking all the over-the-counter meds. And if we don't do that, we're going to keep going down this like road it's not going to end well.
I think that this is why what you're doing is so important because I don't think there's enough of a clarion call for this right now. Western medicine, as we talked about, is just content to keep doing what it's doing.
Well, they're profiting.
Yes.
They benefit off us continuing doing what we're doing.
Yeah. We can talk about Ozempic later in the podcast, but
Their mortgages are paid by demonizing what I am talking about.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is the Ozempic conversation, essentially, which we'll get to. I want to bookmark that one. And I think that when I hear you say this, I completely agree. This is 180 degrees different from the way we were living. All of these things would get solved if we were all just on a perpetual backpacking trip in the wilderness. Like
literally.
That's not how any of us really choose to live, right? Because, having a car is nice. Being able to take your friends to a restaurant is nice. We don't have to do that. But theoretically, I just want listeners to understand that there is, when I frame it in that way, I think, okay, all of this sounds overwhelming, but if we just remember where we've come from as humans, and that sounds like a very antiquated notion, but I think it's so valuable. That framework, where we've come from as humans, is just perpetual backpacking trip. You get sunlight in the morning. You're not stressed as much. You're not a knowledge worker sitting around. You're not looking at screens all day. You're only eating foods that occur in nature. You're getting thermal stress. It's just like, okay, that to me is more manageable than okay, like how do I create most of that in my life now of modernity, right? Because I live in Costa Rica, so I kind of do just run around in like a loincloth most of the time. But a lot of people don't do that. And my life is a little different in Costa Rica. But even in places like Los Angeles, we can bring these ideas into our lives. And that's what it's about. Not overwhelming people saying, oh my God, I could never do that. But it's like the blueprint is it's just where we've come from as humans. And it's so interesting that this discordance really between our genetics and our environment is just causing us to get really sick.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also like we're in such a dopamine loop right now because all the major industries in our world like are putting us on a dopamine loop. And so it's almost like if we don't step back a little bit, we could be on that hamster wheel for our whole life, almost thinking that we're happy, but knowing that we're actually not that happy. I mean, depression and anxiety, it's through the roof. Suicide is just, it's so disastrously high as one of the leading causes of death in the US. So I do think that when you talk to people, like people kind of know that something's not quite right with how things are going right now. But I think it feels incredibly overwhelming to think about how to unpack this world that we're living in. But just like you're saying, I think step one is to, go through all the factors of a modernity that are impacting our cellular health and just like chip away at each of them. Like that can look like we don't, it'd be awesome if we could all move to like a sort of Costa Rica style, but like you can bring those things. You can, if you have a tiny little deck outside your apartment, you can makeshift build a little standing desk out there. You can do that. You can choose to drink your coffee on a walk around the block rather than sit on your couch and drink it. You can choose to open your mail sitting at a picnic table outside rather than doing it inside. You can go to the farmer's market instead of going to the grocery store. Like there are small things we can do that get us closer and they get us probably 80% of the way there without it being like our life turning into a backpacking trip, but like they're going to look weird. And then what you do is once you do the weird thing, you realize there's all these other people doing the weird
And
thing.
you find your community. It's very
Yeah.
fun.
And then people like us all find each other.
And we're back to tribe and
Yeah,
community.
exactly.
And it all starts to work.
Yeah.
Just want to pause the podcast for 1 minute to tell you guys about one of our sponsors, Lineage Provisions. This is a company that I founded with my buddy, Anthony Gustin. We make the finest animal-based snacks and foods on the market. We have grass-fed beef sticks, and we have a new product out now, which I'm so excited about. This is air-dried steak. There are only 3 ingredients in here, guys. 100% grass-fed beef, organic apple cider vinegar, and salt. This is essentially like biltong. If you've ever had South African biltong, that's what this is. We just called it air-dried steak because not everybody knows what biltong is. But this is hands down my favorite snack when I'm traveling. You can find it at lineageprovisions.com. This is gonna blow your socks off, guys. If you need a snack, if you need something on the go, if you need something post-workout, pre-workout, you're traveling on a plane, there are so few good options for us when we're traveling now. And we've got you covered at Lineage. We've got our grass-fed beef sticks, and now our air-dried steak, which I'm so excited to tell you about. In case you didn't know, we also make an animal-based protein powder. We make a glyphosate-free honey. We make the best tallow in the world, which has the lowest amount of linoleic acid the lab has ever seen. And we make a very pure creatine supplement. But you can get some creatine in the air-dried steak as well. So check us out at lineageprovisions.com. There are so many foods here. So check us out at lineageprovisions.com. We are definitely crafting some of the highest quality, easy to access, convenient foods on the planet. These are gonna make your life easier, and you're gonna feel great when you eat them. Let's talk about food, because I am biased. I love thinking about food and nutrition, okay? So when it comes to diet, from your perspective, and I think food is really powerful because it's one of the biggest levers, right? We make hundreds of food decisions a day. We eat kilogram quantities of food every single day. We know that milligram or microgram quantities of medications can profoundly affect our cellular physiology, and yet we eat kilogram quantities of food information a day, and I don't understand why this isn't taught more in medicine. So from your perspective, in terms of diet, what are we doing wrong in diet that is making us metabolically unwell, that is really breaking our mitochondria, leading to these downstream issues of inflammation and oxidative stress?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest mistake we're making is we're eating ultra-processed foods. So ultra-processed foods are a science experiment invented by food chemists and food scientists, pretty much just starting after World War II, started really accelerating in use in the 1970s. And just simply put, they are a science experiment that has failed. It's not working. They're not conducive to human cellular biology, and they're very bad for the planet as well.
Wait a sec. So you mean these are bad?
Oh my
How
God.
about these?
I can't believe you brought these.
Is this good food, Casey? This is the kind of stuff that I ate sometimes when I was a kid. So we've got kid
I
cuisine.
ate both of these things, and I was 220 pounds when I was 14 years old. So
Okay, here's ultra processed food. But isn't it okay? I mean, it tells me the calories on here, Casey. Can't I just limit my calories?
oh my God.
Can't I just limit? What if I just eat these and like don't exceed my calories? Is that okay? Or like, what's the problem here? Should we look at the labels? Like,
This is, yeah. So I think the thing that people really need to understand, like I would say there's about 4 main things that really make ultra processed foods so disastrous. So number 1 is that ultra processed foods have significantly less micronutrients than real food. So during the processing, where you take a whole food and you modulate it so much to turn it into these individual components that then get put back together like a Frankenstein to make this thing that looks like food if you really squint, or from 100 feet might look like food, but actually is really just chemicals put together and shaped and colored and things like that. So ultra-processed food on average has 50% less the micronutrient composition than real food. And micronutrients are the thousands of different, basically naturally occurring chemicals in food that work with our cellular biology to create functionality. So I like to think of it like some micronutrients are like vitamins and minerals, for instance. And if you think about our mitochondria, this machine that makes energy, the mitochondria actually requires like over 20 different individual micronutrients to even have its proteins inside the mitochondria work properly, like locking key cofactors. So things like manganese, magnesium, zinc, selenium, B vitamins, they actually have to bind to the proteins in the mitochondria to create a tiny conformational shift so that ATP and energy can actually be created. Well, if We get to eat about 50 metric tons of food in our lifetime, and we want to maximize the micronutrient potential of that. Then if we're eating ultra processed foods, we're just slashing those key micronutrients by about half. That's number one. Number two is that these foods are filled with food additives. We have 10,000 food chemicals allowed in the US, most of which have never been studied for safety. I'm sure we can find a few on here.
This is such an important point. I mean,
oh my God, like
sodium acid,
what is invert?
pyrophosphate,
Natural and artificial flavor, propylene glycol,
yep,
cellulose gum, thiamine mononitrate. That might just be a vitamin.
That's a vitamin.
We've got sodium bicarbonate, sodium acid pyrophosphate, monocalcium phosphate, texture soy flavor, disodium phosphate. Like these are invert sugar. This has ethyl alcohol in it.
Yep. And it's fried in vegetable oil.
It's wild. So there's all these.
And these haven't been tested. This is super important to point out that these are part of this generally recognized as safe. Yeah.
Yeah. Generally recognized as safe is kind of a crime against humanity because essentially, like, first of all, I was falling asleep a couple nights ago just thinking about how the phrase itself is so ridiculous. We are saying you can put these in foods for kids, and the phrase we're going to use is generally recognized as safe. It's like, what does that even mean? Generally by who? Like, kids are dying. Like, what are we doing? I mean, you'd think that they would create a better phrase for it, like these are safe, but it's like, oh, it's generally. I don't want to generally recognize as safe. Also, so the main issue with GRAS is that it's a self-designation that the company basically says they present to the FDA that there is some evidence that they have cooked up that it is generally recognized as safe. And then it basically gets approval. So it's not ever like really verified by the FDA that it's safe. And we now have 10,000 food additives that are allowed to be put in our food. Europe has only 400.
This is incredible.
It's incredible. And of course, even if certain ingredients are studied, we have never, ever studied what the cumulative exposure of all those chemicals together in our food system are doing to our cellular biology. Because it's like people say, oh, the dose makes the poison. Oh, a little bit of the BHT doesn't really matter. A little bit of the potassium bromide and the, blah, blah, blah. A little bit of the phthalates, a little bit of the forever chemicals. Well, a little bit of all this crap, I have a feeling is doing something to our cellular biology, but that has never been studied. And there is basically a war against studying cumulative exposure. Because if we did that, we'd realize like we're being crushed by the cumulative amount of all this stuff that's, in our processed food. And now 67% of calories come from ultra processed foods. So it's not like we're getting just a little bit of this stuff. So we've got the food additives, we've got the micronutrient depletion. We also have the fact that these are obviously hyperpalatable, and they are so nutrient dense that they're leading to this process called chronic overnutrition. So they're putting nutrient stress on our cells. Our cells can handle a certain amount of sugar and a certain amount of fat. And, our bodies have to process every little macronutrient that comes in and do something with it. But because these are condensed, just so energy rich, these foods, they're overwhelming our cellular machinery. And so it's not only breaking the machinery, but a lot of it's being stored as sort of toxic byproducts like intracellular lipids and things like that, that kind of like disrupt the whole cell signaling.
Ceramides.
And so ceramides, diacylglycerols, like Jerry Schulman wrote this amazing paper, like a 200-page scientific paper about nutrient stress and chronic overnutrition and what this is doing to our fat cells and our liver cells. And it's basically just like they're overwhelming our bodies with too much macronutrients to kind of process and not enough supportive micronutrients, not enough fiber for our microbiome. So that's a big one. So there's just, and then on top of all of that, they're all sprayed with pesticides, which are destroying our microbiome.
Atrazine, estrogenic,
glyphosate.
turns frogs to different sex.
Literally.
Yes.
Yeah. Atrazine put on male frog embryos can turn them to female frog embryos. It upregulates aromatase, which converts testosterone to estrogen. We've got glyphosate on all of this. So
there's got to be glyphosate and atrazine in these.
Of course. It's not organic.
It's not labeled.
So
yeah, they don't have to say anything about that.
So
but there's 100% natural chicken breast in here, Casey.
That's the health washing. I wonder if there's any health claims. All-Star nuggets. This isn't even claimed to have. Oh, it says no artificial colors and flavors, and it's inspected by the USDA. So that must mean it's safe. But I think that all that is to say, ultra processed foods, they drive us to eat more calories. They're designed to do that. There was an amazing study by Kevin Hall,
This is an incredible
NIH
study.
researcher, that basically took people and locked them at the NIH for a month. And they had 2 different 2-week periods. And they basically gave people processed foods for 2 weeks, and they could eat as much as they wanted. And they recorded every single bite that these people took. And then they switched them over and had them eat unprocessed or minimally processed foods for 2 weeks. And what's interesting is that in the period where they were eating ultra processed foods, it wasn't like egregiously bad. It was like things that we would just consider very normal, like a turkey sandwich with deli meat on white bread. But in the minimally processed 2 weeks, it would be like freshly carved turkey on whole wheat bread. So they almost like looked like similar meals, but one was ultra processed and one wasn't. Well, in the 2-week period where they were able to eat as much ultra processed food as they wanted, they ate on average 500 calories more per day. And over the course of the 2-week period, that turned into 7,000 more calories. And they gained, as you would expect, about two pounds.
Yeah.
And then they lost it on the week that they were eating ultra processed food. So it's just, that's energy. So everyone says, oh no, it's just calories. We don't need to talk about ultra processed foods because if you're eating the right amount of calories, then it's energy. It's all energy. So many of, I feel like the people in the nutrition space are like, it's just about calories. Well, sure. But the ultra processed food is literally designed to make us eat more calories and be insatiable on top of the fact. So you get people eating more food. The food is not then supporting on the cellular level the actual processing of that food because it's micronutrient poor and it's very destructive to our cellular biology with all the food additives. So together, the overeating and the undernourishment of our metabolic processes lead to a problem where we're eating many, many more calories. So unprocessed foods is just in so many ways the answer to so much of our health chronic disease epidemic. And there's an all-out war to get us to eat as many ultra-processed foods as possible. There's $12 billion spent to advertise ultra-processed foods to children. It's sick. I mean, it's not even legal in most countries to do this. So it's crazy. Yeah. And I mean, the food babe, Havani Hari, such an amazing food advocate, she has been really outspoken about the fact that like the formulations we're using in the US for ultra-processed foods like Fruit Loops, they are different recipes than we're using overseas because overseas they have stricter health standards for what you can feed to children. You can't feed them many of the artificial food dyes like Red 40. So they use vegetable extracts and they literally use turmeric powder in some countries to color Fruit Loops. And here we're using petroleum-based synthetic dyes that we know are linked to ADHD and other issues with neurologic development. And so she's basically saying to Kellogg's, which is an American company, why are you poisoning Americans with these foods that we know are damaging to our children's brains? And we sell 92 million boxes of Fruit Loops per year in the US. It's not like it's a little thing. That's 92 million. That could fill a football stadium. It's crazy. And in other countries, because they have stricter rules, you are actually doing something safer. This is crazy. So she's actually, what's so cool, this podcast.
They're doing a march
They're
tomorrow.
doing a march tomorrow. This will be out after that. But like they're bringing about 400,000 signatures to Kellogg saying, cut the crap. Get the petroleum-based food dyes out of our children's foods and at least give us the same standards as other countries. Like, are you kidding me? I mean, maybe they lose a tiny bit of margin. Like, so be it. Like, so ultra-processed food's very bad, long story short. I think the way I think about it, and I present it in the book, is that ultimately eating is the process of putting molecules in your body. And we have these 40 trillion plus cells in our body, and all of them have needs. They need certain molecules to come in so they can do their work properly, And if we match what goes into the body with what the cells need to function properly, we are largely going to have health. It's actually pretty simple. But when we eat food that is depleted of all the beneficial things and then filled with things that hurt our cellular biology, there's a mismatch. The matching problem is not met. And we get cells that just don't have the resources to their work. So we need to think of food as like this molecular resource that, and the thing is, the bill has to be paid every day because the cool thing about the body is that even though like you kind of look like a static entity and I look like a static entity, the reality is that our bodies are turning over every single day. We lose and then rebirth like something around like 600 billion cells per day.
Wow.
So we're just dying in mass and then being reborn every single day. I love this Taoist statement that like life is a process, not an entity. But in Western medicine, we're taught like you're a thing and you're born and you live and you die and it's binary and food doesn't matter because it's just going through your gut and you're pooping it out. Like, no, we are a process. And we are turning over every single day. We turn over our entire skin, our entire gut lining every few weeks. And the food we're putting in each day is the molecular substrate to 3D print a functional or dysfunctional form of our body of tomorrow. That's what's happening. And so the quickest way, aside from all dietary dogma, to get the body the best chance of getting the molecular building blocks to 3D print a functional body is to eat real food. And not just to eat real food, but to eat the freshest food possible. Because every day that the food is dead, either the animal is killed or the food is taken out of the ground, it's denaturing. You're losing some of those magical molecules that can work with our biology to create function. So, I think getting back to the freshest food, think about like a couple hundred years ago, 200 years ago, 97% of Americans were growing their own food. Now it's less than 1%.
Wow.
So what does that mean? It means you go out to your garden and you pick lettuce and then you eat it that day. That has vastly more nutrients than if even the lettuce sits for 2 weeks in a grocery store where it's just dying and you're losing the potential. So we want the highest potential food to meet our cellular needs. And I think the coolest thing about the time we're living in today is that, because people might say like, well, how do I know if I'm meeting the needs of my cells? Well, there's two main ways you can understand if you're meeting the needs of your cells with food. One, how do you feel? Do you have any chronic symptoms? Do you feel incredible? Do you wake up every day with energy and joy and light and want to go out into the world and do cool shit? Yes or no? If you are matching the needs of your cell, more likely you're going to wake up every morning feeling like you want to go do cool stuff. So symptoms, diseases, how do you feel? Two, biomarkers. One of the cool things about modernity is that we are able to actually look at our blood work and understand a readout of whether we're meeting the needs of our cells. And so if you can look at your lab work in a very nuanced way, understand the difference between optimal and normal ranges, understand the labs that can give you a hint about your metabolic health. So things like the, ApoB, fasting insulin, fasting glucose, triglycerides, HDL cholesterol, HSCRP, an inflammatory marker, uric acid, vitamin D, I think I said fasting insulin. If you can look at these things every few months and actually be certain that you are like really in the optimal range for a lot of these things and you feel incredible, you're probably eating the right diet.
Yeah.
You're probably eating the right diet. You don't actually need someone to tell you need to be vegan, you need to be carnivore, you need to be paleo, you need to be keto, you need to be this or that. Because if you are eating a whole foods diet and your labs are looking perfect and you feel freaking incredible, you're probably, for this moment in time, in a good place. And that may change over time.
Yeah.
Because our bodies change over time, our hormones change over time, our stress changes over time, and we may need to modulate our diet for different parts of our lifetime. And I'm probably saying stuff that you might disagree on some of the nuances with here, and I'm fine,
Not really, no.
But I think we can actually cut through all the crap and get to kind of like, how do we figure this out for ourselves through, I think, truly slowing down and taking stock of how we feel and being very consistent and taking ownership of our biomarkers and doing it regularly. We can have that answer that we've all been looking for of like, what the heck should I eat?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And, most people that listen to my podcast know that I came from a place of extreme dietary restriction and carnivore and then added fruit and some other things to my diet. And over time, it's probably a subject for another podcast. I do think there are some people that some foods that we traditionally think of as healthy that can trigger their immune system. But I think that's just like a subset of people who have intense autoimmune issues. I happen to be one of them. When I eat tomatoes, my eczema flares. It's a curse because tomatoes are delicious and I'm Italian. But I think one of the things I've started to say in my messaging in the last few years is just, if you're thriving, don't change anything. So that's fine. Like if you're a vegan and you're thriving, in my mind, that's kind of an improbability, but sure, don't change anything. That's awesome. So I think it's not so much about what people are eating as much as the way they're feeling and how awesome they're showing up in the world. You hit on a few things that I really want to highlight for listeners, which is that this calories in, calories out thing, I feel like that's a psyop. And I feel like it's kind of designed to confuse people. And you highlighted on your social media this recent Time article that came out where they actually changed the title of the Time article. The first title was something like, "What if processed foods aren't that bad for you?" Right? Like, this is a psyop, people. Like, if you can't see that that's a psyop, from ConAgra, who makes this,
Right.
like, this is the same psyop that Coke used to use. Like, soda's not bad, just don't drink too much of it. Like, it's just about calories, Casey. Like, it's cool. Like, you can eat a donut.
Yeah.
You can eat a donut, just don't go over your
Yeah.
calories. And as you said very eloquently, the problem is that you can't just eat a donut. You can't just eat a Pringle. You can't just eat one of these banquet meals, because then you're going to be ravenous and confused and anxious and irritable, because it's going to mess up your whole cellular biology. So calories in, calories out, yes, it works at a thermodynamic level. I believe in physics. But it's a psyop. It's meant to confuse us.
But here's a question on that, though. Even if, yes, thermodynamics, energy in, energy out, but if those calories are bringing along with them things that destroy our ability to actually break down energy, like they have a literal chemical that is a mitochondrial disruptor, then
it affects calories out.
yeah. So I guess I don't fully, I hear what you're saying, and I think everyone says like, yes, I believe in energy in, energy out, but I'm like, what if that energy that you're coming in is actually breaking your ability to break down energy? No one talks about that.
The qualities of the calories in.
Lame.
The qualities of the calories in affect the calories out.
Yeah.
And that's.
How are we not talking about this? Like, I don't understand why this is a controversial thing.
I don't understand either, but we'll keep talking about it. And I think people will eventually realize that the conversation is happening. But whenever I talk about this, I have not been terribly successful at talking about this broadly. I haven't figured out how to educate people on this, because people will always have that knee-jerk response, like, but it's thermodynamics. Like, and I think that people are saying, like, you could lose weight eating donuts. Yes, you could lose weight eating donuts, but that is someone who is incredibly disciplined. And there is a guy who did the Twinkie study. There's a researcher, I forget what university, who lost weight eating Twinkies. You know that his cellular biology got less positive, right? Like, his cellular biology was less healthy at the end. His micronutrients were depleted. Like, he was almost certainly hungry and irritable. If you put yourself in a mental prison and you only allow yourself to eat donuts, you can lose weight doing that. But that's not how anyone exists in society.
Yeah.
What we're talking about is real life, not, a Twinkie experiment.
Yeah.
And that's the idea. And that's why I think this calories thing is just confusing to people, because these companies, and I think this is part of the marketing that we're going to see more of with all of this lobbying dollars in Congress, is like, you can eat processed foods every once in a while. It's okay. Just don't go over your calories, except
They're designed
to make you eat more, and they're probably breaking your mitochondria, which makes it so that you can't actually turn that food energy you can't turn that food potential energy, which is something I've heard you say, into actual usable energy. So it's potential energy into kinetic energy. And that's what our mitochondria does.
Yes.
Before we move away from food, I have to ask you about seed oils.
Yeah.
What do you think? They lower ApoB, Casey.
Yeah. I mean, I have so many thoughts on seed oils, because, oh man, this is the most controversial issue, I feel like, in nutrition right now. But I'm going to actually start completely away from the health conversation, because the health is going to be debated endlessly. But one thing that people never talk about with seed oils is they are like destroying our planet.
Yeah.
They are pretty much universally being grown as monocrop, commodity crop agriculture, just ruthlessly sprayed with toxic pesticides. Huge fields of these plants. So like soybeans, we've got grapeseed oil, soybean oil, canola oil, all these are going to be massive amounts of plants, which take a lot of water, and pesticide runoff is going into all of our rivers and destroying our river physiology and destroying the Gulf of Mexico and destroying human health, and very bad for farmers. Farmers have a hugely high rate of cancer and depression and suicide and all these issues. And then you take a ton of these seeds, and I mean literally a ton. I believe it takes about a ton of grape seeds to make like a very small amount.
Crazy.
It might be a ton of grapes or grapeseed, but it's a massive amount to make these small bottles of oil. And the process through which they're made is disgusting. If you've seen the videos on like how canola oil is made, it's like an 8-step process that involves chemical solvents like hexanes and heating the oil to very high heat, bleaching the oil, and then everyone will say, well, none of that gets into the final product. It's like, I don't want that near my body. Are you kidding me? Like, I don't want my food bleached, even if the final product doesn't have bleach in it. Like that has been said to me so many times. Oh, it doesn't end up in the final product. Well, what does it end up in? A clear plastic bottle that sits on a shelf, and that light is oxidizing that oil. So before we even get to the cellular biology,
Yes.
this food is destroying our planet. Monocrop, pesticide-covered agriculture is bad for people. It's bad for the planet. It's bad for our fish. It's bad for biodiversity. It's not good. Versus if you imagine, okay, I'm going to eat what I eat, which is like a beautiful olive oil from Flamingo Estates, which is a regenerative farm in California. And those olive trees are being, there are animals roaming around. There are no pesticides being used. It's very water conscious. And then the process of making that olive oil, that olive gets squished.
And the oil comes out and they collect the
and
oil.
It's in a dark, thick bottle
of glass.
It's different.
It's totally different.
It's different. Or if you're eating lard or, your beautiful tallow, this animal, every part of it's being used, regeneratively raised. It was living with the land to support soil biodiversity, pooping and peeing on that land, tilling, gentle tilling with its hooves, all part of an ecosystem that's beautiful. That animal, died and created millions of probably over 1 million of usable calories for people, high nutrient density, and then its fat was turned into literally just blended up. I don't know exactly how it's made, but heated,
rendered,
and now it's in a glass bottle. So it's just, even before the health part of the conversation, it's just like, just use your head. Like, how do you want your food made? Is it good or is it not good? And we need to have some common sense in part of this as well. Now let's, get to the issue of the reason seed oils, I have a huge problem with them is because obviously I'm not the first to say this. They're very enriched in omega-6. We're eating so many more omega-6 fats than we have in human history, probably like a 20-to-1 ratio versus traditionally what we should be eating, which is a 1-to-1. Not only are the omega-6 potentially inflammatory in their own right because they incorporate into cell membranes, and when your immune cells are coming around trying to make prostaglandins and the immune cells snip fats off the cell membrane to make immune compounds. And when they snip omega-6s, it turns into pro-inflammatory immune mediators. So that's one. But two, we talk a lot about how plant-based omega-3s are essentially inferior to animal-based omega-3s. Omega-3s are our anti-inflammatory, fats, and we're very diminished in them in our diet. But one thing that's really interesting is that the way you actually convert a plant-based omega-3, like alpha-linoleic acid, to EPA or DHA is through a series of enzymatic steps. These desaturases and these enzymes that basically convert a plant-based omega-3 to the really usable bioactive form of EPA and DHA. So that can happen in the body. We can convert plant-based omega-3s to EPA and DHA. However, the enzymes required to convert ALA down are the same enzymes that omega-6 fats use. So if you are filling your body with omega-6 fats, you are blocking the ability of those enzymes to actually do what you need to do, which is convert ALA to EPA and DHA. So you're out-competing these enzymes when they need to do work that actually could be beneficial for you. So when I think about not eating seed oils, I'm thinking about freeing up my enzymatic processes to convert my chia seeds and my hemp seeds and my flax seeds, which I do eat, to the downstream omega-3s. And so inflammatory potential, blocking of our enzymes that we need for the omega-3 pathway. And then, of course, like their oxidation potential, the fact that they can become more easily oxidized with light and heat, and then that can create damage in our bodies. So what did I miss? I mean, is there anything else that,
You got it. I mean, when I think about seed oils, the best summary that I've seen is like they're an oxidative liability.
Ooh.
You're putting a bunch of linoleic acid. This gets a little technical, but my audience I think has heard it. So you're putting this omega-6, 18 carbon polyunsaturated fatty acid into your cells. The thing that's unique about linoleic acid is that it accumulates in our cells, right? So we can interconvert monounsaturated fats and saturated fats, but we can't make polyunsaturated fats. And that means we can't make omega-3 and we can't make omega-6. But we have far, far more omega-6 in our diets, as you said, than omega-3s. If we ate 7 tablespoons of fish oil per day, that might be a problem for humans, right? There are actually studies in Eskimos who eat lots of fish that we can exceed the amount of omega-3s that we want. It can lead to potential clotting issues and maybe even hemorrhagic strokes. But we don't eat 7 tablespoons of omega-3 fish oil, and omega-3 fish oils are not added to junk foods. It's the omega-6 fatty acids. And as you said, you would have to eat 70 plus ears of corn to get the equivalent of 5 to 7 tablespoons of corn oil, which is what the average American eats in a day across all different seed oils. Whether you're soybeans, it's 2.5 pounds. It's massive amounts of these foods that you'd have to eat to get the equivalent of the oil. So you have this evolutionary inconsistency in what we're eating, and these oils accumulate. So they might not cause problems the day you eat them. And that's kind of this loophole that people who want to argue and say seed oils are neutral or they're benign, or they're even sometimes positive leaning in statistics, will say, look, well, they don't cause inflammation in the short term. But like if you stack your cells full of omega-6 linoleic acid, which is, by the way, the most common fatty acid in LDL particles, is omega-6, is linoleic acid. And as you said, it's one of the two tails of a phospholipid in the cell membrane. And LPPLA2, so lipoprotein phospholipase A2, comes along and snips it off. And what do we know? There's been at least one study in humans that when you eat soybean oil, LPPLA2 gets upregulated. And there's multiple studies in humans, and this is the data that I keep coming back to. There's studies in humans that are randomized and controlled, and they show that oxidized LDL goes up when you eat seed oils, and LP little a goes up when you eat seed oils. And I just find this hard to ignore. And then when I look at the data regarding RCTs, unfortunately, no randomized controlled trial has been done with seed oils in the last 70 years. Imagine that. Who's going to fund it? So it's only been in like the 50s, 60s, and 70s that we had LA veterans, that we had Minnesota, that we had Sydney, that we had the trials that we look to. And then it just gets a little murky because a lot of the control groups, the saturated fat groups relative to the seed oil groups in these trials, were given oils that had trans fat. And then Darius Mozaffarian writes a meta-analysis about seed oils and says, hey, look, here's a forest plot that shows that they're neutral or positive. And Facebook uses that to fact check all of my posts on seed oils. That's how it goes.
That is based on data that's super old.
Oh yeah, it's all based on super old data and a meta-analysis that's super questionable. And he's including a lot of trials in his meta-analysis in the forest plot that should be thrown out because they're absolute garbage.
Was this the same as the Tufts Food Compass paper or a different paper?
It's a different paper.
What is he doing?
Well, he's funded by Bungie.
And also,
Which
that
is a
paper was
company.
funded by Barilla, like a pasta company. The Tufts Food Compass paper is actually funded by a lot of processed food companies, which not like Kellogg's or Quaker, like some of the ones that did show up with higher scores than we'd expect, like Lucky Charms, healthier than eggs and beef. But it's wild. It's wild.
It's crazy.
And then the NIH, of course, which also funded the paper, has 8,000 major conflicts of interest with food and pharma. So yeah,
this is kind of what makes me a little crazy. And I really hope that the next administration, from a bipartisan position, I hope the next administration will be able to correct some of these things, even at the social media education level. If I can't do a post on social media where I just cite 6 randomized controlled trials without it getting fact checked based on somebody's AFP article who's citing one meta-analysis from Darius Mozaffarian that I can actually debunk in the same reel, then we have a major problem. We have a big problem, and nobody's really looking at the science properly. So that's seed oils. What about fruit? Because this is an interesting thing for people. I just want to get your take on this. Because like when I look at the data on processed sugar, it looks really bad. Yeah. But what about fruit?
I mean, I think pretty much as far as what I've seen, universally, we see that higher intake of whole fruits is associated with better health outcomes. Okay. So that's kind of observational, large sort of population studies. But I mean, the fruit, which has sugar in it, and refined sugar are like as different as night and day. Like, that's how I feel.
Yeah, that's how I feel too, yeah.
I mean, a whole fruit, ideally organically grown, regeneratively grown from good soil, not covered in pesticides, not genetically modified to be 10 times the size that it should be, all those things, caveats. It's going to have literally thousands of phytochemicals and different types of micronutrients and antioxidants and these amazing plant chemicals that work with our cellular biology to create good functionality. And so you've got all these beautiful nutrients in a fruit. You've also got the sugar surrounded by a cellular structure that makes it absorbed less quickly as a processed sugar or a fruit juice. There's the fiber, there's just the cell walls basically that help make this all sort of a slow and gentle process. And you're also the interaction with the microbiome. The microbiome eats polyphenols and fiber, and then it's going to have a pro-metabolic effect through the short-chain fatty acids they create, all of this. Right. So it's like, it's just a whole different universe than a tablespoon of refined sugar that has no polyphenols, no antioxidants, no micronutrients, no vitamins and minerals, no fiber, nothing. It's just a straight up, it's a drug. That's what it is. It's a highly refined drug that isn't doing anything for our cellular biology. It's just pure energy, basically. That then, because it's so quickly absorbed, actually does very differentially impact our reward circuitry and our dopamine. A whole fruit, you can't really get addicted to whole fruit because it absorbs so slowly, and the way that it interacts with our satiety hormones, it doesn't activate the dopamine pathway the same way a refined sugar does. So night and day. And I think that obviously with my work with levels, we've thought a lot about fruit because there are people who put on a continuous glucose monitor and they become kind of afraid of fruit because they might see a very big glucose spike. And I do think that one thing I found really interesting with our population, and also just wearing a CGM for a long time, is that my reaction in terms of blood glucose response to different fruits is very variable. So certain fruits, like for instance, an unripe pear or an organic farmer's market apple or a persimmon, these don't cause a glucose spike for me really at all. Like maybe like 10 points, just like a gentle rise and fall. There are certain fruits that I can eat, like grapes specifically, that I've actually gone up to 210 milligrams from 75. So like 120, like into the diabetic range. So, and then of course, what happens after a huge glucose spike like that, which is that it crashes. You have a huge insulin release and it crashes, and then you have this postprandial hypoglycemia, and then often, that doesn't feel very good. So with all that, and of course, based on research, we know, like the Cell paper, personalized nutrition by prediction of glycemic responses, we know that everyone responds differently to different foods. So you might not respond to grapes the way I do. So this is not in any way saying grapes are bad, but for my physiology, I would say that it's actually probably best for me to avoid grapes.
Interesting.
Not because fruit is bad, but because for some reason, the way it's interacting with my physiology or the grapes that I ate that day. And it's not because that one spike is going to like predispose me to diabetes. It's because it feels really shitty to have a crash. It's not like you've damaged your physiology forever, but postprandial hypoglycemia, there was a paper in Nature from a couple years ago that showed extent of our post-spike crashes in glucose predicts how much energy we're actually going to try and consume that day.
Oh,
so
interesting.
Predicts cravings, predicts total energy intake, because a crash is sort of a threat signal to the body that says, I need to get my blood sugar back up to baseline, and promotes basically you wanting to eat more carbohydrates. So for me personally, so I believe that fruit is a beautiful food filled with nutrients, so different than refined sugar. And also based on learning more about my glucose responses, I select within that whole category the ones that do better for my overall blood sugar response so that I'm not on that roller coaster.
And that's unpleasant, as you said. Yeah, it's super unpleasant. What would be super interesting, and I've never actually tested this, but I have a couple CGMs in Costa Rica, would be to test response of different foods at different places. This gets into like the chronobiology and almost like the Jack Cruz type of thing. Like, would grapes don't necessarily grow in Costa Rica or equatorially, but like, would a fruit like a mango, if you're eating a mango in California, that was grown in Mexico,
Totally.
Right? Does that affect you differently when the sun is not as bright? Who knows? It's super interesting.
Think about also your microbiome. If you and your genetics, like imagine if we were Costa Rican. We had that genetic, whatever that is. And then we grew up there with that soil and with that microbiome and with that food, and then ate a fruit that's grown locally, and we ate it during the sunlight hours. It's like, I would not be surprised if that pattern is different than if a Northern European is eating grapes in the middle of winter in California that have traveled 1,500 miles. You know what I mean? It's just like, I don't know for sure, but we don't think about these things.
Yeah, it's super interesting. It's super interesting because this is one of the things, and I love farmers markets. I know that not everyone has access to farmers markets, but I don't even have to think about what's in season in Costa Rica because I don't shop at a grocery store. And I don't want that to sound elitist. It's just that the only way I can get organic food in Costa Rica is to go to the freaking farmers market. So I go to the farmers market twice a week. And sometimes there's mamonchinos, which are rambutans. Sometimes there's mangosteen, and then the mangosteen are gone. And there's no more mangoes in Costa Rica right now, but there's watermelon, and I can get, what else can I get? I can still get rambutan, I can get dragon fruit, but those are kind of going out of season. But like, it's very seasonal. It's the same thing. I think if you're shopping at a farmer's market here in California, nobody's importing grapes from Mexico. You're only going to get what's local at the time. So farmers markets, I think, just help me to see, because I don't have the, the mental capacity to go on my phone and be like, what's
Right.
in season
Right.
now in Minnesota?
Yeah.
And we kind of run into trouble, I think, a little bit because a lot of the country, there's really not much at all. You're basically looking at winter squash.
Yeah.
Seattle, I did my residency at the University of Washington. There aren't really even farmers markets much in the winter in Seattle because it's so dreary. But if you were to go to see farmers, there's not much.
Yeah.
And so the question then becomes, well, if I live in Seattle, should I just be eating squash all winter? Like maybe I shouldn't be eating strawberries. I was never that disciplined. And I think that for me, I hope that I had enough other things right that I didn't need to get that granular. And we're pretty far down the rabbit hole now.
Yeah, and I do wonder about, like, I think in some of those cultures, it would be like they had storerooms in the
Yeah.
basement and, that were cold, and you'd be eating your root vegetables throughout the
Yeah.
winter, your onions and your potatoes, and they would last for a long time.
Squash lasts a long time.
Yeah, months.
Months.
Yeah,
It's crazy.
and certain fruits actually can last for a long time, especially when stored properly. And then the fermented foods, right?
Yeah.
Because they'd be fermenting and processing in the indigenous way, to basically preserve nutrients for the winter. This is beyond what many of us can do. I shouldn't say that. We can do anything, but
Yeah.
what we're willing to probably do in our modern world. But I think there were probably ways that, you could manage that seasonal variability. People had to. We evolved until today. So, but it happened. And I'm just now in my journey of health, which is a 15-year journey now, starting to think more about the seasonality and that type of thing, because it's like you go down the rabbit hole, like you said, and it just keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And we're like, yeah, like how do we shape our modern lives to allow us to basically eat in a way that's more in touch with the seasons and in the time of day. If we want to eat more during sunlight hours, then we maybe need to eating our dinner at different times in the
Yeah.
summer versus the winter, because
Yeah.
we know that like once that melatonin starts getting secretion, it does impact our insulin sensitivity.
It makes a lot of sense.
So,
It
yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Just want to pause the podcast for one more moment to tell you about Heart and Soil. Heart and Soil is a company that I'm also very proud of. At Heart and Soil, we make the finest grass-fed, grass-finished, regeneratively raised, desiccated organ supplements on the market. A lot of people want to get more liver, more heart, more organs in their life, in their diet, but it's really hard to do this. I mean, a lot of us aren't super excited about eating liver. It has a funny taste. We're not used to it. And that's where Heart and Soil makes it so easy for you to get these organs. Check out this review on beef organs. This is one of our best-selling supplements at Heart and Soil. It contains heart, liver, kidney, spleen, and pancreas. I've been taking beef organs for almost 2 months now, and already I feel so good. I have so much more energy, no more migraines, my hormones are starting to balance out, my cycle has already gotten much better, and my immune system is getting stronger. I am so grateful to Heart and Soil, and will never stop taking these supplements. Again, it's hard for us to get liver, heart, kidney, spleen, and pancreas in our diets, but we are sourcing these organs from regeneratively raised cows that are fed grass for their whole lives in New Zealand. They're packaged in a beef gelatin capsule, and all of our bottles are glass. We don't want to contribute to more plastic in the environment. We don't want any microplastics on the capsules or any contamination like that. We're committed to being as low plastic as humanly possible. Heart and Soil also recently released a protein powder, which is super popular. You should definitely go check that one out as well. It is a very low temperature processed whey protein. And when we did the analysis, the amount of immunoglobulins, lactoferrin, and other immune components in our whey protein destroyed the competition. There's not another whey protein on the market that I've ever seen that has the amount of immune activity that ours does. And we also add colostrum to the whey protein along with collagen. So our animal-based protein is something you should definitely check out if you're looking for more protein on the go, or if you need more organs in your diet, check out something like beef organs. You can find us at heartandsoil.co, that's .co. Getting more organs in your life will definitely improve the quality of your life. Energy, libido, mental clarity, recovery. We are meant to be getting the unique nutrition found in organs, and we are going to make it easy for you at Heart and Soil. What about honey?
I mean, I'm like a bee fanatic. And
I love bees too.
I mean, I think I respect bees so much. And yeah, I would say I probably have a less nuanced view in honey than you do. I mean, I'd rather hear it from you. I think for me, honey is a natural food that comes from nature, that tastes really good to humans, and that is filled with vitamins and minerals and nutrients. And there's other parts of what the bees create, like the propolis, that are like literally magical medicines.
They're in there.
Royal jelly and all these things. It's absolutely incredible. So I'm kind of in awe of it, and I do use it. And with that said, I also, if I eat a ton of honey, I sometimes do have a really big glucose spike and crash, and I don't feel great. So I use it in in moderation in a way that keeps my blood sugar more balanced. But like as a food, it's a natural whole food that is a gift from the earth.
Yeah, it's
And I
beautiful.
don't think that it's like in its own right problematic. I am definitely more now eating, because I think with levels, I kind of went into the sort of like eating more allulose, monk fruit, and stevia because they were non-nutritive natural sweeteners. And if I could find organic sources of them, I'm like, okay, this is the best option. And I would say over time, I have moved a bit more into like dates, honey,
Interesting.
and like fruit as sweeteners and things like that, because I just so much of the trajectory of my life and my journey is like, actually, how do we get back to nature?
Yeah, yeah.
And so, how can I use these substances in a way that doesn't put me on a huge blood sugar roller coaster, but does allow me to support, you know, people who are raising bees in a super sustainable way and to get all the value of that food, like the vitamins and minerals and immune benefits and all of that stuff. So that's kind of the journey I haven't been on, but I haven't gotten down the rabbit hole, I would say, on the research on honey, but I'm sure.
There's a little bit. There's a little bit. I mean, I've been impressed with honey. I mean, I think there are trials. I don't think there's a ton because, again, who funds them? But it actually raises testosterone in males. And yeah,
Wow.
and then there's actually a really interesting trial in diabetics that I've cited a lot, where they gave people honey up to, I think, 125 grams a day. And
Wow.
over that time, so what happened? Their blood sugar goes up a little bit. I think A1C went up a small amount. I think the average blood sugar difference between the honey and non-honey groups was about maybe 10 milligrams per deciliter. So the A1C went up, but the fasting glucose went down. And I
Whoa.
think they did a clamp. I think they might have looked at insulin sensitivity. The insulin sensitivity improved over time. So this is interesting. I've been kind of wrapping my head around this, thinking like, okay, you mentioned something earlier that I always want to keep in my back of my mind, which is that 93% of Americans are metabolically unwell.
Yes.
So should metabolically unwell people be eating honey? I don't know, right?
Right.
But I'm not sure. I just think that when I'm looking at this, what I try to communicate to people is that I don't think that honey caused you to get unwell, right? Yeah, exactly. And that's where I come from. And so I think, like you have said eloquently, it's probably an individual thing. If you eat honey and you feel good, great. If you eat honey and you get a big hypoglycemic response, don't eat it. It's probably not for you. Maybe you're not ready for it. Maybe not everyone's genetics or time of year or seasonality is going to be connected with that. I mean, I think that sometimes I have to take a little bit of humble pie and realize that I do live at the equator most of the year. And so what I experience might not be what everyone else experiences, because honey is available to me year round, right? At the equator, honey is available year round. And when I was in Tanzania, honey's available year round. The Hadza live right at the equator. And so we are equatorial beings as Homo sapiens, but a lot of us don't live at the equator anymore. So are the bees here in California still producing honey in October? I don't know. Farmers market would tell you.
That is so interesting.
It's just an interesting thing.
Yeah. And I do wonder about that too, like about a metabolically healthy person whose like machinery is churning through substrates and they're not dealing with chronic overnutrition and nutrient stress and a cell full of toxic lipid moieties and, all these different things. It's like on top of that, this is why like I do think about like somewhat extreme diets, like a keto diet or like a full vegan diet or like carnivore or whatnot. It's like, there may be a time and a place for extreme diets that basically help you clear out your cell of a lot of the crap that has built up and put a lot of like real food nutrients. And then from that place of more stability of the cell actually being like less overburdened, which maybe is actually just achievable by cutting out all ultra processed food, no matter what, sort of like paradigm you use, then adding in like more, natural sweeteners like a honey or something, like your body can process it.
Yeah.
But, I don't think there's like specific answers to all these questions. But step one, I think, for the average American body is like, we have to get off all the ultra processed foods so that we're not overwhelming our cellular machinery every single day with toxins and these just super nutrient dense foods, so that because our cells know how to clear themselves out. They know how to turn over and get to functionality, but we just have to full stop on the toxic crap coming in.
And I think that, and this is something that's been an evolution for me, I think that you could eat a lot of different foods and be healthy.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people can eat beans or potatoes and salads and olive oil. You can eat, if you're getting rid of the processed foods, it's probably the single biggest step we can make.
And if you feel great and if your biomarkers look good. So like if you're someone who you're eating a ton of beans and you truly have zero gut symptoms and you feel incredible mental and physical health,
Do it.
and your HSCRP, your ESR, your white blood cell count, your autoimmune markers, your ANA, your thyroid, if they're all perfect, I'm like, who am I to say
Me
that those
too, yeah.
beans are screwing you up?
Yeah.
So I think that's where that combination of like, be the CEO of your biomarkers, slow the heck down so you can actually know how you feel. So many of us are so disembodied, and like we don't even know what it feels like to feel good. So like it's both of those things together. And I agree with you. I mean, I think we both, it sounds like, come on sort of like a little bit, maybe more. It's a journey. Nutrition is a journey, and it's a constantly evolution of thinking, I think, for me.
Yeah. So in terms of a dietary prescription, I think I want to give people this value, like it doesn't have to be complicated,
No.
right? So
real food.
yeah.
Real food, unprocessed food, as local as possible. The local is key. More nutrients to help your cells heal. The average piece of food in the US is traveling 1,500 miles. We have to cut that down to 100 miles, I think. And eat the food from the farmer's market. We have 9,000 farmers markets in the US. Make it a priority. If there's one thing to eat, I think the reason we don't do it is because we don't realize how important it is. But the fact that the food came from the soil or the meat, is fresher and higher quality, it makes a difference. So that is a takeaway. So real food as local as possible. If you do those two things and just commit to cut out all the ultra processed food, your life will transform. End of story. That is the reality. And then from there, fine tune, fine. But that's, 15 years into this journey, if there's one thing I know, it's that.
Yeah. And if you still have issues once you're doing the real food, then go down the further rabbit holes and get more selective with your diet.
And a therapeutic diet.
Yeah.
There may be parts of that whole food diet that are triggering your biology.
Yeah.
Like lectins, like some of the plant chemicals that maybe your gut is having so much trouble from the how it's been hurt over the past 20 years that you actually need to remove certain food compounds to get the healing you need. I mean, when Michaela Fuller, there's a lot of people who have truly healed their gut from getting rid of all the plant compounds. So that might be, but I think step one is moving away from the ultra processed foods.
Before this podcast, you told me that you used to be a vegan.
Yes.
You also told me you've never eaten organs.
That's right.
Do you want to do it?
Oh my God. I'm kind of nervous. This feels like my biggest weak spot is that I'm scared of eating organs, and yet I know that I should. So tell me, is it going to taste a lot different?
It won't. It basically tastes like a meat stick. Do we need to maybe we get like a, like if you need to spit it out?
No, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to smell it first. I think that's key.
No, just eat it.
Oh, wow. These are cute.
So anyone, in case
so
anyone's
it's mostly beef.
It's mostly beef. It has heart. It has liver. And if you look at the ingredients in this, because this is a company that I founded with Anthony Gustin, the ingredients are grass-fed beef, beef heart, vinegar, grass-fed beef liver, sea salt, and beef collagen.
Yeah.
So there's no funny business in here.
How do you wrap your head around liver? Do you have to have and now it's just second nature for you, but is there... do you just think of it like we eat muscle? Why not eat liver?
Well, yeah, I think the Hadza, it was the first thing we ate. So I'm there with these hunter-gatherers in Tanzania. It's the first thing we eat. They killed a goat, right? And the goat was brought to them. So one of the things we did for them was we gifted them a goat. You can do it while I'm talking, your face. And when they killed the goat, they held the liver with two hands and they gently placed it on a rock. And then they cut it into pieces, and they just gave it to everyone in the tribe. It was like a piece of, I don't know, they held it like a child. It was like a very sacred thing. They were like this, and I think of liver as a multivitamin, right? That term has been co-opted, but really for humans, you don't even need much more than the size of a multivitamin a day in liver.
Really?
Yeah, humans can eat a half ounce of liver per day, and it has this huge effect on our biology, just in terms of micronutrients.
Wow.
And potentially in terms of microRNAs also, but that's a subject for a different podcast. Yeah.
Whoa.
Because this is a crazy thing about organs, and I want to get back to the metabolic health with you, but so Heart and Soil is the business that I founded, and they make desiccated organs, so they're freeze-dried. What we found is that when you freeze dry organs, or if you eat organs raw, which is kind of, queasy for a lot of people, you don't denature these microRNAs. There was just a Nobel Prize awarded for microRNAs. And the hypothesis here, and there's actually literature from the 1950s and 1960s in Germany that we found, where the microRNAs positively affect cellular biology and gene transcription in the corresponding organ.
Stop.
No, it's really interesting. So
Oh my God.
So if you're eating a little piece of raw liver, the hypothesis, which I wish we had more US research, is can the microRNAs, can these signals, even beyond the nutrients in that, affect the gene transcription in your liver? Or, women eating ovaries, or men eating testicle, or humans eating the gut of another animal affecting the gut. Or people eating brain, right? It's super interesting stuff. So this is just the value of organs. Like with liver, you don't need a lot.
Wow.
Just a little bit. Yeah. So there's a little bit of liver in there.
How many of these would you need to eat per day to like get that multivitamin dose?
I mean, for these, you'd probably have to, it's a little bit of liver, like half a bag.
I
maybe.
barely taste I don't think this tastes like a beef stick.
Yeah.
It's delicious.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Oh, it's so good.
It's good, right? Yeah.
The texture is really good.
We worked so hard on this. A lot of credit to Anthony. We did like 50 plus trials. I don't want it to be like a commercial for the beef sticks, but whatever. 50 plus trials. It's air dried. Yeah. This is all for you. Anyway. Yes,
I like it.
Calley Means.
I'm proud of myself.
You hate organs.
Well, no, I know I need to eat them. It's a mental thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, why is it okay to eat muscle?
And not the rest of the animal.
It's a cognitive thing. Obviously, there's so many other cultures who don't have that hang up, but
they just do it.
Oh my gosh. I feel like you could create some sort of like therapy, like modality for people to like undo this like mental construct.
Like cognitive behavioral therapy for organs.
I think it's true. Cause I do think, I've talked to so many people. I think there's a hang up about organs.
There is.
Even though muscle is an organ.
It is an organ, right?
And heart is a muscle.
Heart is a muscle. And in Peru, they have anticuchos. People get these things sort of,
Yeah. And also, it's so funny. I would so take organ supplements without even thinking twice. It's something about the chewing and the eating. So anyways, that could be a little
that's why I knew that my mom and my sister wouldn't do the liver. That's why I built, Heart and Soil. Anyway, so the organ supplements are interesting and they're freeze dried. Yeah. Okay.
Huge.
So yeah, I'm so glad that you did
Delicious.
that. Yay. All right. So we talked about food.
Yeah.
We've got a little bit of time left. Let's talk about a few of the other things for people to give them some prescriptions. I'm biased. These are all important, but I think for me, it's food and sleep are the biggest ones, but that's just my perspective. So let's talk about sleep for a minute.
Yeah.
To talk to people about things.
Sleep, we're not sleeping well in this culture. There's not good data, but like we might have been sleeping 20% more on average about 100 years ago. We're sleeping less. And if you think about the world, just our circadian disruption, our circadian rhythms are destroyed because of artificial light and we just don't go in the sunlight anymore. So sleep and sunlight, I think, are very interconnected. But the average American now is spending 93% of their time indoors. It's crazy. And that was a study that about 4% of that is in cars and the rest is in the four walls of your house. So we are these incredible bipedal animals that live on the most spectacular planet in the universe that we know of right now. Like it is the most hospitable. It's heaven, on this planet. And we are choosing to lock ourselves in the confines, a self-imposed prison of comfort in our houses and not go outside of the world. And so, of course, we're scared and we're, exhausted and we're fearful because we're literally not going outside. Isn't that the average? Or there was a recent study that showed that about 50% of kids are going outside less than a maximum security prisoner. We're not going outside. And that is implicated with our sleep because we're diurnal animals, whether we like it or not. We have biologic processes that happen during the sunlight hours, and we have biologic processes that are supposed to happen at night. And because we are literally not going outside, we are not telling our bodies what time it is.
Right.
The way our bodies, we do have sort of entrained clock genes and all this stuff in our bodies, but the way we actually reinforce the knowledge of our body of what time it is by exposing our skin and our retina to photons. So our bodies are not seeing photons during the day and they're seeing blasting blue light at night because of our technology, which is totally new. And so our bodies have no idea what time it is. They are totally circadian confused and it screws up our sleep because all of our hormones that regulate our sleep are controlled by light. This is not rocket science. And then we don't sleep. And that has a huge impact on our hormonal health, our cortisol, our growth hormone, our testosterone, our sex hormones, all these things. And so our sleep is short. We are not sleeping enough. We are not sleeping consistently, meaning we are not going to bed and waking up at regular times. And if we did live by the sun, we would have these, periods that we sleep. And it would change seasonally, but it would be pretty specific. It's only changing maybe by a minute or two each day as maybe the sun changes. So we're inconsistently sleeping. We are not sleeping enough, and our sleep is interrupted because of light in our bedrooms, because of noises, because of all these things we allow to distract us at night, our beeping of our phones. all this
Which
stuff.
shouldn't even be on at night.
That shouldn't be on at night. There has been research that shows that sleep consistency, sleep quality, and sleep amount each independently have an impact on those three subcellular processes of metabolic dysfunction: oxidative stress, chronic inflammation, and mitochondrial dysfunction. So in my book, I lay out, there's research showing that each of those three factors of sleep, which are screwed up in our modern world, each independently causes the trifecta of metabolic dysfunction. So we have to prioritize that for all aspects of cellular health and hormonal health. And it starts by spending vastly more time outdoors during the day. We have to figure out a way. This actually seems like one of the easier ones to me. If we're spending about 93% of our time indoors, how do we just turn that to 50%?
Right.
That requires is looking at all the things we do each day, checking email, catching up with our partner, playing with our kids, cooking, doing podcasts, and just creatively finding a way to do each of those outdoors. My dream is to have an outdoor podcast studio. And my also dream is to have an outdoor kitchen. I know you've actually moved forward on a lot of these things. I've seen your life, and everything kind of looks outdoors for you.
It's pretty much.
It's actually, when you just start to think that way. So my fiance and I, we have all these books at our house about basically building indoor outdoor houses. And it's not that, there's a lot of people who do that. It's not actually that crazy, but why do we have to be indoors all day? We don't. That's a recent phenomenon. So the sleep what I would recommend for everyone is take a look at your daily activities and pick 2 or 3 things today that you're doing indoors that you could actually do outdoors. Because the more sunlight you get during the day, the easier it's going to be to go to sleep at night, and the higher quality your sleep is going to be. But yeah, when I was researching the book, some things that really were fascinating was this whole sleep consistency thing. Humans are sleeping very erratic bedtimes and wake up times. And there's this concept called social jet lag, which is a scientific term where basically if you look at work days and leisure days, so weekdays and weekends, and obviously that varies for different people working different shifts. If you look at how you sleep, 12 midnight to 8 a.m., your sleep midpoint is 4 a.m. And if you're sleeping 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., your sleep midpoint is 2 a.m. If the midpoint of your sleep between your work days and your leisure days, or just between different days of the week, is over 2 hours, it doubles your risk of developing diabetes. So you need to keep things consistent. And the nice thing about a lot of the wearables is they're actually showing you your sleep consistency now. How erratic are you? That was the one I had to work on the most. I was getting enough sleep, but my bedtimes were all over the place because of social stuff and because of work, and it's you got to commit. We need to treat ourselves like babies. Have a bedtime, have a wake time, and be consistent with it. And it just changes everything. And I think also moving your sleep up, going to bed earlier, can be really valuable because we get more of our deep sleep earlier in the night. So that's been one of the biggest challenges for me as a night owl, is just moving it up and being consistent. And it's transformational for energy.
So important.
Yeah.
I've seen this in my own life. So I live in Costa Rica. The sun basically rises and sets at the same time of year, the same time of day all year round.
It's equatorial.
It's equatorial.
Yeah.
So I am in bed, and my audience will laugh at this, by almost 8 o'clock every day because I get up at 5 or 5:30 to go surf. And I told my team I can't do podcasts in the afternoon with this lighting. So we're recording this. It's almost 1 p.m. here in California. This probably won't mess up my circadian rhythm too much. We're going to walk right outside and go for a walk right now and meet our friend Anthony Gustin. So we're going to get outside, move, and do all the things because we've been sitting. So we're going to hopefully correct some of this blue light. We're doing this for you guys.
This is for you.
This is for you guys. We sat under blue.
It doesn't feel good though, right?
It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good. And but I'm doing it for you guys. And it's just how it goes. But basically, when I record podcasts at home in Costa Rica, I told my team, no blue light. So I use all ambient light. And my editor's like, it doesn't look as good. And I was like, well, do what you can to make me look okay. But I was like, I can't do it because I remember recording podcasts at 3 or 4 in the afternoon. And granted, remember, I go to sleep at 8 p.m. and it would mess with my sleep. And again, we're under artificially massive blue lights here.
Yeah.
But this is it's so impactful. And I've noticed for myself that if I'm on my phone too late, I have filters on my phone, I have filters on my computer to take out the blue light. But even with the flicker and stuff, it's just very stimulating. It's such a big lever. And I can't tell you how many people I talk to who are super dialed with their food. And they say, well, I do TikTok at night to wind down. And take their phone and want to throw it in the ocean.
Yeah.
Don't
I think
do that.
you taught about the triple hit thing
And
and
you can do
turns the
that.
phone red. Yeah.
Mhm.
But no, it's important. And when you start feeling the benefits, I think it makes it easier to, but I mean, everyone needs to go outside the second they wake up. End of
Yes.
story.
Yes.
Brush your teeth outside. Every time you start brushing your teeth, which is 2 to 3 minutes, just walk outside. Get some sunlight. You got to start the day. It is so easy in our modern world to just be inside till noon, especially now with everyone working from
Oh,
home.
no.
And it's a disaster for our health. All of our life source and energy comes from the sun. We have to start thinking about the sun again as our life force and realizing that we have to be in relationship with the sun to be healthy. The psyop of the century, of course, is
The sun is bad for
the
you.
sun is terrible.
Oh my.
And that we should literally fear the sun. And of course, we don't want to get sunburns. That's not good. But sun exposure and sunburns are two different physiologic things. And, I don't know how we're going to unwind that cultural force that's been so damaging, that is basically you need to be inside all the time or be completely covered. And now everyone's vitamin D is 20. And we know vitamin D is involved in thousands of cellular processes and anti-cancer and all of these things, mental health. But it's more than the biology. We all know that being outside in the sunshine is good for our spirit.
Well, you can feel it on your skin, because I always think about, can you replace sunlight with a vitamin D supplement? Probably not. We get nitric oxide, we get endorphins made in our skin when we're in the sun.
Yeah.
It's crazy. You make cholesterol sulfate, the precursor to this, 25-hydroxy vitamin D, in your skin when you're in the sun. There's probably some other cellular processes that are not just a pill. You can't put sunlight in a pill. It's better than nothing if you live if you live really far from the equator in the winter, but it's a sketchy, scary thing.
Also, just being outside with the sun, it reminds you that you're on a planet.
Yes.
In a universe.
Sometimes I remember.
That's amazing. And I think it's on that subconscious level, it also reminds us, it feeds into the stress component of metabolic dysfunction, which is so much of the reasons we're stressed right now is because we feel, I think, we're living in a fear matrix that is that is created to profit off of our feeling small and limited. And when we get outside in the sun more often, I mean, I can't prove this with a double-blind placebo-controlled study, but it makes us happier and healthier because we see our picture in the greater web of things.
When I was in Seattle in my residency in psychiatry, we had these bright lights, because Seattle's quite dark in the winter. And I saw a lot of people with seasonal affective disorder. And the bright lights don't really work, right? It's just a blue light that you're putting in front of your eyes, and it doesn't work. But what would work is if somebody would go to Mexico and actually get in the sun. And so, or if somebody would actually go outside, and you can give someone vitamin D for seasonal, it doesn't work.
Really?
Well, no,
it doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
What if someone in Seattle, even though it's dark in the winter, just basically spends almost all their time outdoors? That would probably help.
It would help a lot because but you have to really spend all of your time outdoors.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of tribes up. I would surf at this place called Nia Bay. And
I've been there.
Yeah, I think it's the Macaw tribe. I think I'm getting that right. And there are plenty of tribes that live up there quite healthfully, but they're outside all of the time.
Really?
Yeah.
Even in modern times.
Oh, well, not so much now.
No,
They have a meth problem on the reservation now. But
oh man.
Yeah, it's horrible.
But they were living.
But historically,
Yeah.
I mean, humans have lived all over the globe being outside all day. Now, there's differences in terms of vitamin D. And of course, probably in the summer, they're getting lots of vitamin D being in the sun in Seattle.
Yeah.
They're storing it in their fat and it gets them through the winter. But you'd have to be outside almost all year round in Seattle.
Yeah.
It's very hard to manage that stuff. And so that was my constant struggle when I was in residency there, especially in the winters. What do I do?
Yeah.
And I moved away from there. But for people that are there, that's a little nugget.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. What a joy spending time with you.
Thank you for helping me get over my liver and organ fear.
I love that we did it.
This is amazing.
Where can people find more of your stuff?
Oh my gosh. My book, Good Energy, The Surprising Connection Between Metabolism and Limitless Health, where everywhere books are sold.
New York Times bestseller.
Yes.
Number one New York Times bestseller.
20 weeks.
What amazing.
It's awesome. Yeah.
Freaking amazing.
Well, I feel like the success of the book is built on the thousands of other people who are talking about this. It's all of us, it's and people give a shit about metabolic health right now, which is one of the most exciting things I could possibly imagine. Because if we care about metabolic health, that means we're moving towards more life force. and that's good.
Yeah.
So that CalleyMeans.com. I have a newsletter that goes out every Tuesday where I totally unfiltered. And yeah, and then Levels. Levels is the how to get continuous glucose monitors if you want to dial into that aspect of metabolic health, and that's levels.com.
Okay. And your brother is Calley Means, who I've had on the podcast. I'll put a link in the description of this podcast to my conversation with Calley, because that was another, between the two of you, these are some of my, probably some of my favorite episodes ever, and like so full of information. I would encourage you guys to listen to any podcast Casey and Calley have been on, because they've been on a lot recently, and the knowledge they drop is insane. I was listening to you guys on Rogan, and Calley talking about the history of Western medicine with Rockefeller.
So
like,
bad.
My jaw was on the floor. We didn't have time to go into it today. It's kind of Calley's shtick anyway, but like it was like
Flexner report.
The Flexner report. Yeah, the Flexner report. The fact that like Rockefeller, not only did he create schools to make us good 9-to-5 workers, which are destroying our circadian rhythms, he probably potentially created the pharmaceutical industry to have byproducts of his petroleum business used, and then you can't consider any sort of alternative medicine to be anything but quackery because it's against the pharmaceutical
and you
religion.
won't get funding as a medical school if you do go against it. And then the cigarette companies all bought the food companies and put their food scientists on processed food. It's great stuff.
The history goes very deep,
Yeah.
guys. If you want to realize how much you have been psyoped around
and what
this,
we're living in.
yes,
Yeah.
the world that we're living in,
Yeah.
like it will blow your mind.
And that
so.
it's so easy to break out.
Yes.
Yeah.
The cage doors are open.
They're open.
And
Let's go.
let's go. We're gonna break out of this Cage Door podcast studio right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.